Hi guys, welcome along to another edition of Build with A&E. So in this episode, I'm going to be teaching you exactly how to lime plaster a wall. I'm going to show you the mixing process, I will show you the application and the finishing process. So stay tuned and enjoy the show. So before you start your plastering mission, you are going to need a few basic tools to get the job done. So what we need is a selection of trowels and obviously a hawk. You're going to need a wooden float and possibly a plastic float. You're definitely going to need a sponge float as well. This is for the actual top coat, the lime putty. You're going to need a spray bottle or a hose depending on where you are. You're going to also need a scratcher. There are many different ways of using scratchers, but I'll show you exactly how we do that, and also a different type as well as we go through the video, and some straight edges. So I use a derby, which is one of these, which is effectively a straight edge with some handles on. You could use a feather edge or some timber with a chamfer cut on it if you wish. That is about it. Now what we'll do is we'll go outside and we'll show you the tools you need for mixing and the process of mixing as well. What you are going to need for this is a cement mixer. You could mix this stuff by hand, but it is a long process to do, so I would definitely recommend, if you don't own one, pop down to your local hire centre and get one of these, because it will make your life a lot easier and you will definitely thank me for it. The product we are using in this instance is lime plaster. This is pre-mixed. It looks a little something like this. So this is basically lime, an aggregate and synthetic hair. We don't use horse hair anymore. So yeah, it's a synthetic hair that's actually used in this now. It's actually pre-mixed, but it is quite dry. So all you need to do is basically put it in the mixer, add some water and let it turn over. So I'll just show you that process now. So like I mentioned, goggles, definite must, and gloves are also a bonus because like I said, it does burn if it gets on your skin too often. So always stay protected. Don't turn the mixer on yet, just literally fill it up. I've pretty much half filled the mixer. We're going to turn that on now. So yeah, we're just allowing the mixture there to just turn over a little bit. And what we're going to do is just apply a small amount of water each time. I'd recommend no more than really a litre at a time, to be honest. It will splash as well, so make sure you stay out of the way of it. You don't want this stuff to splash in your eyes, hence the goggles. You can see now it's starting to turn a bit better, a bit more life into it. You will need to mix this for about 15 minutes in total, just to make sure that it's actually properly workable. But you will need to add a fair bit of water to it along the way. But like I mentioned, just add a little bit at a time, because the last thing you want to do is add too much water and then it's just going to be slop and you're going to have to wait a long time for it to be a usable consistency. So now that water's mixed through, just add a bit more in. Like I said, if this is your first time of mixing, then just add a little bit of water at a time, just to be sure. As you get used to it, you'll know roughly how much you can get away with. If you see it sticking a bit at the back, it might be a good idea just to lift the mixer up a little bit. Just like this, and then it will pull it out then. You can see the mixer's moving around a bit, and just slowly let it back down. There you go, it's coming away from the back a bit better now. Right, so I can see from that I still need a bit more water in there. Don't really fancy pushing that at the wall yet. Basically, that's it. Just repeat this process until you get the right consistency. I'll let this mix for a little bit and then I will show you the consistency we're after. Okay, so this has been mixing now for about 15 minutes, like I said, and that is the consistency that I'm after. It's quite soft, very workable, but it's got to be sticky enough that it's going to stick to the wall. You don't want it to be runny. It's not skim. This is a backing plaster, so it's obviously got to have quite a bit of body to it. Yeah, something like that. That's bang on, that is. So that will be brilliant to push up the wall. So what I'll do now is get it in some buckets and get it upstairs on the spot board. So we're upstairs now on the wall in question. A few things you need to do before you get started. Obviously make sure any loose plaster is removed, and then what you want to do is get a stiff brush, go across the whole wall, give it a good brush down so you remove any sort of looseness off the wall. So make sure you've got a good base to work on. Next, what you want to do is get one of these, like I mentioned earlier, full of water, and give the walls a good spray down. I've already done this once yesterday, but I'm going to go over it again. The reason we do this is to stop the suction. If there's too much suction on the wall, all that's going to happen is when you apply your lime to the wall, it's going to suck all that moisture out straight away, and then it's not going to adhere well to the bricks. It's literally just going to dry up, crack and fall off. So we want to make sure that there's very minimal suction on there. You do want some suction because you need it to help the calcification process of the lime. So it's important just to wet it down, just to take some of that suction out, and that is it. If you are working in an area where there's no floorboards or anything like that, you could get a hose. It would make this job a little bit easier, but we've got floorboards under here, so I want to make sure that they're not saturated. So literally just work your way across the wall, give it a good old soak. You don't want the water completely running down the wall, but you do want it to be wet. So I'll continue this process across the whole wall, and then we will start getting some lime on. So we've got our lime plaster up. If you don't have a spot board, it's not a problem. You can just get the lime straight out of the bucket and put it onto your hawk. But in this case, I've got one, so I'm going to use it. It's a lot easier just to scrape straight off onto your hawk. So as always, wet down the board first, because again, it's made of wood, so it will just suck the moisture out of the lime. So it's really important that you get that wetted up. And then you can just get the lime straight on top of it. There we go. So I've got my lime on my hawk, and now what we're going to do is work our way across the wall. The way I like to work is top to bottom, and you can work left to right or right to left, whichever way you prefer. I do prefer generally with the backing plaster to work from right to left because I'm right-handed. So what I'll do is apply this and then work the next pull into that and then go across it. So I'm literally working it all the way back into itself. If I was skimming, then I would go the opposite way, but it's down to personal preference. This is just the way I like to do it. So literally get your plaster and push it at the wall. You're aiming for around a 10mm coat with this. You don't really need to go any thicker unless you have to, but I wouldn't recommend going any more than 15mm. You may have issues with it sagging then as well. Just working it in like that. Do not overwork the plaster because all you'll do is pull the lime to the surface and make it a weaker material. There you go. So as this is the scratch coat, it doesn't need to be perfect, but what we are going to do is rule it off. So what I'm trying to do here is I'm applying it up the wall, and then I'm going across it as well, just to see if there are any low spots. But what we will do is run our derby across it as well, just to make sure that we're nice and flat and where we need to be. So I'm going to do a small section here, probably to about here, and then work my way down to probably about here, and then I'll run my derby across that, make sure that level's flat, and then work my way across the wall doing the same process. Worth noting as well, keep your trowel quite a steep angle when you're going over it. The last thing you want to do is make it smooth, because what this will do is a few things. It may pull the lime to the surface. It also doesn't allow air to penetrate through, which will slow down the calcification process. And also when you come to put your second coat on, you'll end up with quite a shiny surface, so it doesn't like to stick to that. So if you just apply like that and just bring your trowel across quite a steep angle, across like that, it roughs the surface up ever so slightly, and that will give your float coats a much better surface to stick to. Always wet your derby off first, and then what I'm going to do is just gently go across the wall just to level it off. Like I said, this is just your scratch coat, so it doesn't need to be perfect at this stage. I'm just trying to make sure there's no major high spots. There we go, that's it, simple as that. Okay, once I've gone a bit further across as well, I will actually roll up the wall just to make sure that we're pretty much level on both planes, horizontally and vertically. And that's it, literally just repeat this process across the wall, and then we'll show you about scratching. So you've seen me using the scratcher, which is this. Make sure you wait until it is pulled in quite nicely. If it's still a bit wet, it will do bits like this and it will drag quite a lot. So you want to make sure that it's pulled in enough so it doesn't drag. When you use your scratcher as well, try and go around 45-degree angle like I am here, and then go across it the other way. Again at 45 degrees, and then all this does, when you come to put on your float coat, this will give you a nice key just to ensure that the next coat sticks nicely to it. Some people do wave like this, but I wouldn't recommend it. These angles are better just to allow the moisture to travel properly. If you use a wavy thing like this, you end up with a wet spot at the bottom of the dip and then a dry spot at the top. So this allows the moisture to fully work its way down the wall. So it's definitely a better technique to do it like this. You're aiming for a couple of mil, you know, probably 3 mil or so of depth in your scratch, and that should be a sufficient enough key then for your next coat. Sometimes there will be some hairline cracks which appear in the wall. It's not a problem at all, but if you do get some larger cracks, then that may be an issue. I'll cover that though in the next section of the video. So what we do now is literally leave this probably for about 3 to 5 days, depending on the humidity in the air, the suction in the background. There's a few factors, but what you need to do is make sure that this coat is fully dry before you apply the float coat. So I'll leave this now and then we'll come back when it's dry. So the wall has had a good few days to dry now. You can see it's pretty uniform in colour all the way over, which means it's dried nice and evenly. A few very minor cracks, a few minor areas like this, nothing to worry about. Just give it a tap. So long as it's solid, it hasn't delaminated, then it's completely fine. That is the purpose of this coat, is basically to obviously get a key coat on there and also to take some of the suction out of the bricks. So when you apply your scratch coat now or your float coat, it doesn't pull in like this and won't cause any cracking. Again, there may be some very minor cracks, but it's nothing to worry about whatsoever. So all I need to do now is basically go over where we've scratched it. It's actually caused a little bit of it to raise up. So you just get your trowel and just run over it, just over the surface like this, nice and gently, just to take any high spots off. And then once you've done that over the whole wall, just get a brush it down just to get rid of any loose bits, and then we're going to give it another drink over the top, again just to take the suction out. So I've given the wall a good soak, I've scraped everything off, brushed it off like you saw. You can see where it's starting to dry in various places, but what I'll do is, as I'm applying the lime across, I'll also go ahead myself and just re-wet the wall down as well, just to keep that suction down, because like I mentioned, we don't want the suction to be too great. All that's going to happen is it will pull the moisture out. It will make this coat delaminate, which obviously we don't want. We want this coat to form part of this coat as well. So what I'll do is set up a time lapse and you can watch this process. So we have now applied what will be our float coat. What we need to do now is wait for this to pull in. So actually at the minute you can see it's too wet, my finger can just easily squidge into it. So we need the moisture to pull through slightly enough, just so it firms up, so that when you run your float over the top of it, it doesn't just drag everything off. If I just do that now, you'll see it just pulls the lime off, which we don't want. We want it to be firmed up enough so that when you run the float over the surface, all it does is takes off the high spots and doesn't drag out massive amounts of plaster like this. Otherwise you're just going to be constantly fighting against it. Once we've gone over it with the float, we'll then tighten up our little screws. So we've got this, which is a devil float. Put those in just like this, and you can see you're looking for about 2 or 3 mil of the screws sticking through the float like that, and then we'll go over that then, and that provides a nice key for the lime putty to go on afterwards. So I'll just wait for this to go off now and then I'll show you the process. So you've just seen me floating the top section of the wall. Literally use your float, hold it towards the back end rather than like this. That way then you have more control over the pressure that you apply to the float. And we're just looking for a figure 8 motion, just to run over the surface like this, and all we're doing is knocking off any high spots and filling in any imperfections. If there are the odd bit like this, you can just use it in a small circular motion just to pull some of the plaster back into the hole, or you can carry your hawk around as well, which I like to do. Just put a bit of extra material on there just in case there are any larger sections. So the top section has gone off quicker. Then the bottom section, there's a few reasons for that. First of all, I worked across the top and got the top on first, and then did the bottom, and also moisture will naturally run down the wall, so you'll always find the bottom of the wall to be wetter than the top, so it's always a good idea when you're floating, always start at the top, work your way across and then back down. There may be the odd area which does dry out quicker, but obviously just check over it. Like I said before, once you're floating, you'll see when it's ready, it will just feel nice underneath the float, and if it doesn't start doing that, then you're ready to go. If it does start dragging, then give it a little bit longer to dry off a little bit more. Once you've gone over it, some plasterers do the devil float straight away, so this whole section would already be devil floated, but I like to go over with the float first and then flick over it with the devil float. You can find that with lime it can cause quite a bit of damage to the surface. It doesn't give you that nice sealing that you would do just doing a normal float and then a flick over with the devil float. But it's down to personal preference, it's just the way I like to do it. You guys might think otherwise. So yeah, what I'll do now is work my way across the bottom of the wall and then I'll go over the whole thing with the devil float. But if this is still a little bit wet, I may go over and devil float the top area that I've already floated. So just see how the plaster's reacting and just work to it. So you've just seen me float up the surface and then I've gone over it like I mentioned with my devil float. So literally just a normal float with a few screws in it, about 2 centimetres or so apart, and then just screwed through about 2 or 3 mil. And then just go over the surface like this. We're literally just scratching the surface, and all this does is provides a key for the lime putty to adhere to. So what I'll do now is leave that well alone, and hopefully by tomorrow that will be ready then for the top coat, the final coat of the lime putty. So I'm looking for it to be firm enough that I can just about indent it with my finger or my knuckle, and so just about you can scratch it with a nail. You don't want it really to be any harder than that, because otherwise you're going to have problems when you come to put the lime putty. It will just suck out the moisture straight away. So you need it to be still a little bit green, but we'll cover that tomorrow when I come back to it. So it is now the following day and the plaster has gone off perfectly. It's all about timing really with this. I wouldn't recommend putting this float coat on a Friday, for example, because then it'll have all weekend to harden and it may be too hard by the time you come back in. So ideally make sure you're going to be able to be in the next day to get this top coat on. So like I say, just push your knuckle into it. If you can just about make an indent, that is absolutely perfect. So as we did with the scratch coat, I'm just running the trowel over it just to take the high spots off. What I'm doing also is just cleaning off the edges, just to make sure that when we come to put our lime putty on, we don't have any big unsightly bits dragging along in the plaster, because that's going to cause you nothing but problems. So just use the edge of your trowel or a small tool or a scraper, just run across your corners like this, across your edges, just knock all those snots off, all those extra bits of plaster which you've got on there, and then just run your trowel across like that, just to take any high spots off. Same principle as before when we were doing the scratch coat. This just enables you to be able to get this next coat on nice and smoothly without any issues. So the last thing you want is bits dragging all around in your lime putty. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go over the rest of the wall, just scrape it off, get it all cleaned up ready, and then we'll show you how to mix up some lime putty. So now our wall is prepped and ready. What I'm going to do is get the plaster mixed up. This is the top coat, which is also known as lime putty. You can mix this yourself using lime and sand, very fine sand, but I would recommend, especially if you're a beginner, just to use pre-mixed stuff. All you need to do is put this in a bucket, mix it up with some water, and it's good to go. So it does save a lot of hassle, and you know the mixture is exactly what it needs to be. So with this stuff, as usual, wear your goggles, because this is very caustic, and if you get this in your eye, it's going to be a trip to the hospital. Slit the top of the bag and drop it straight in the bucket. And because I'm doing quite a large wall, I'm going to make sure I've got enough, so I'm going to do 2 bags at a time. Obviously if you're doing smaller areas, you'll only need to use 1 bag. Again as well, you don't have to mix up 2 bags, you can mix up 1 and then another one straight after. So just giving it a turn, just to get a bit of life into it. Now I just add a bit of water, slow and steady with this stuff, because it can turn to slop quite quickly if you put too much water in. So always err on the side of caution, you just add a little bit at a time. So every person has their personal preference to the consistency of the lime putty. I prefer it to be quite thick, just like a very thick, heavy cream, I suppose, really. Some people like it a bit thinner. I just like it to be like this, it's just my personal preference. So obviously it needs to be thin enough that you can push it at the wall. You don't want it too thick. At the same time, you don't want it too runny, because otherwise it's just going to fall off the floor. So this to me is ideal. What we'll do now is get this on the wall. So we've got our lime plaster on the spot and stand, and what I've done is just gone across with my spray bottle, like I showed you before, just a gentle mist over this. The lime is already quite green, so you don't want to put too much water on. Otherwise what's going to happen is when you put your putty on, it's just going to slide across the wall. So you still need it to be a small element of suction there, because obviously that's how it dries and that's also how it keys to the wall. So if it is, like I say, just wet, it's just going to slide around. So obviously you don't want that. So just a gentle dust of water across the wall. You can do the whole wall in one go, or you can just do small areas as you go across the wall. It doesn't really matter, so long as you don't saturate it. And then what I'm going to do, unlike when we were doing the backing plaster and working from right to left, I'm actually going to work left to right. The reason for that is, when you're doing the backing plaster, you need to work the material back into each other, and also it enables you, if you're working this way, it enables you to hold your hawk underneath and catch any loose material that may drop. Whereas when we're skimming, we go left to right. This is for right-handed people as well, by the way. If you're left-handed, it would be the opposite way around, but I'm a righty. So what we're doing when we're putting the top coat on, we're constantly spreading it out, so we're pushing it further down the wall, because we're not looking for a thick coat of this. It's only about 3 mil thick. So by working left to right, you're then pushing the skim, or the putty should I say, across the wall, yeah, and making sure you've got a nice thin even coat across it. So right to left with the backing coat, left to right with the top coat. So now I've done that, I will start to get it on the wall and show you what I'm doing. It's important that you don't overwork this. Just get it on fairly flat. It doesn't have to be perfect at this stage, because there's a lot more work that's going to go into it yet. I'm just applying left to right. This is just a base coat of your top coat, so it doesn't have to be perfect. We're literally just getting this on there to get something onto the wall. Your top coat will then take out any major imperfections. You're looking for about 1 or 2 mil on this coat, and then probably about 1 mil on the second coat. Across, just to make sure that there's no ramp in the corner, and then work your way across. And then obviously once you've done the top of the wall, you'll then drop down off your steps and then do the bottom of the wall. So we'll just carry on with that, and I'll talk you through the next process later. So that's it, the first coat is applied. All I'm going to do now is basically leave this to pull in slightly, and then I can apply my second coat over the top of that. Because I've actually applied it quite uniformly, I'm not going to flatten in between the coats. If when you have applied it, there are a lot of ridges, then I would recommend flattening it off between the coats. But if it's like this and fairly flat, then there's no need to at all. The premise behind the second coat is to take out any imperfections, fill in any hollows, and go over any lumps. So I'll leave this now for, well, probably about 10 minutes or so, just so it's pulled in enough so my fingers don't make a mark like this. I want it to just be firm to the touch, but obviously still soft enough that it's pliable when I put on the second coat. So see you in a minute. So I've left this now for about 10 or 15 minutes, just enough so that when I touch it, I'll make a very, very small mark on the plaster, and that is it. So now I know that's absolutely perfect for me to go straight on with the second coat. So I'm not going to flatten it or add any water to it. I'm literally just going to go straight on now with the lime putty over the top of this. So that's it, the second coat is now on. What I'm going to do now, again, is just leave this some time now just to pull in, because I don't want to go over this with my sponge float just yet. What this does is basically flatten everything off nicely, adds a little bit of moisture into it, just to pull a small amount of lime to the surface, so that when you trowel it up, you get a nice smooth finish. But I don't want to do it too soon, because all it's going to do is drag a lot of material around and create a lot of lines that I don't really want to be there. There will be some small lines which will be created, but that's perfectly fine. As soon as you run your steel trowel over it, it will just flatten them straight off. So I'm going to leave this now probably a good half hour or so, judging by the suction that's been happening so far, but I will keep assessing it just to make sure I don't leave it to go too much. You don't want it to go absolutely rock solid, because then you're going to be fighting against it, but at the same time, you don't want it to be too soft like I mentioned, because it will just damage the wall. So leave it until it's firm to the touch, but you can probably just about see a fingerprint in it, maybe just a slight indent. But you'll know if you go over with the float and it starts making big drag lines, then that's too soon, you need to leave it for a little bit longer. So this is about ready to go now. It feels nice and firm to the touch. If you look down it as well, you can just see that the moisture's just starting to go out of it. It's forming more of a matte effect finish on it, rather than over there. It's still a little bit damp, but by the time I've worked my way across the wall and got back down to it, it should be perfectly fine. So like I mentioned, I'm just using a sponge float, just soak it with water, and then I'm just gonna go across in like a figure-of-8 motion, just same as we did with our regular float. And all this is doing is just taking out any extra imperfections that are there and just flattening the wall down totally. It's only making very fine marks in it. A lot of this is just fat that's pulling forward, so that's perfect. When it starts to drag a bit or it doesn't pull as much as it was, literally then just fill your float back up with water, maybe give it a bit of a scrape off just to get rid of some of the excess. Just on the side of your bucket, give it a dip in the water again, and you're good to go. So that's it, just repeat that process across the wall, and then once I've done all that, I'll leave that to go off a little bit more, and then we'll give it the trowel up. So you just saw me troweling up. What I did was use my sponge float to go over, like I mentioned. Once I did that then, it was ready to go straight back onto, and then use my trowel, my steel finishing trowel, to go over again, left to right, working the plaster nicely. You do have to apply a fair amount of pressure. This is a manually intensive job, so obviously be aware of that before you take this on. A very small amount of water in certain places if it's gone off a little bit too much, if it's pulled in too far. Always keep your trowel wet as well while you're doing this. Once I'd gone over it then brings some lime, some moisture to the surface, so you then need to leave that a little bit longer for that to dry off yet again, and then you can go over it just with a moistened trowel. Don't apply any more water to the wall, just keep your trowel wet and then just cross trowel or up and down, whatever you see fit, just to take any knobbles off and just to make it a nice smooth finish. So that is about it. Obviously if this is going to be your first attempt at lime plastering, please don't try a wall this size. Maybe go for something a little bit smaller to start with, just to hone your skill a little bit. I also wouldn't recommend using lime plaster if you've never plastered before. It is, like I mentioned, a very labour intensive job, and trowel skills are required to be able to put this on properly. With all that being said, if you've liked this video, please make sure you like, comment and subscribe. There will also be in the box below links to pretty much all of the products that I've used for the duration of this video, so if you are interested in starting this and you need some of the extra tools that are in here, the links will be in the description below. You've been watching me, John, on Build with A&E. Until next time, stay safe.